you guys, Flickers of Fear time once again. So this is a real good one that we are talking about today. This is actually a movie that I saw several years ago, but I had been wanting to rewatch it again to talk about it for this series. And this is the 2016 movie, The Void. Now, this is a very, very well-regarded Lovecraftian film. It's Canadian. And it was written and directed by Stephen Kostanski and Jeremy Gillespie. And I believe that most of the funding from this movie came from Indiegogo. I think they made like $83,000 or something like that. I don't know if that was the entirety of the budget. If it was, wow, because they did a really good job. I don't know if they had some money from other sources as well. So I'm going to say that just like kind of a lot of horror films, indie or otherwise, from the past, decade or so, it has a very heavy 1980s influence. And, that's a good thing, generally. It has really, really good, very, very splattery, like, practical effects, and they look terrific. And it does kind of reference a lot of 80s era horror films. Like, it's not ripping them off, or even homaging them, really, but it does kind of have a lot of touchstones that were used a lot in 80s horror. And I'm not real sure about this. It seems like, and I've watched it the second time today, and I was kind of like, it almost seems like it's set in the 1980s, because it doesn't seem like anybody has cell phones, and like some of the cars, like the car models look older, but I don't think the year is mentioned in it, unless I totally spaced out and like missed it. It's not important to the story or anything like that. I just thought that was kind of like interesting. It almost seems like it's not in any particular time period, you know what I'm saying? Now, this discussion is going to have spoilers, so if you haven't seen The Void, probably you should go and watch it, because it's really good, and you should go watch it. Actually, at the moment, as of this recording, you can rent it someplace like YouTube and stuff like that, obviously, but I actually watched it on Crackle for free with ads, so, if you don't want to spend money on it or anything like that, you can actually, if you have Crackle, you can actually watch it on there with ads. So, the movie starts out with this woman. It's like a great opening sequence, because you're just immediately like, what the fuck is going on with this? So this woman is like running out of a house with two armed men like running after her, and she's like freaking out and screaming, as you would, obviously, and they shoot her in the back. And then another dude comes out of the house, but he doesn't get shot. Like, he manages to avoid being killed, and he just takes off into the woods, like, surrounding the house. And then, so the two shooters, just come out in the yard where the lady is laying there. She's still alive, and she's trying to, crawl away and stuff, even though she's been shot in the back. And they just kind of, very, I don't even know if I'd say casually, but they do kind of casually just kind of, set her on fire, while she's screaming and stuff. So you're just kind of like, huh, okay, that's quite an opening sequence. All right, you've got my attention. So then we cut to the main character, who is this kind of small town police officer named Daniel Carter. And he sees the wounded guy, that ran into the woods earlier, kind of crawling out of the woods, and he hurries over there to help him, because he doesn't know anything that's been going on. So he takes this guy, the guy's name is James. He takes him to this hospital, the nearest one. Now, the hospital that he takes him to only has, this really small, skeleton staff, because there was a fire that broke out there recently. So the few remaining staff members are going to be moved to another hospital, shortly, but they're kind of stuck at this, empty backwater hospital that's damaged, for the time being. So when he gets there, the only other people at this hospital are a nurse named Allison, who also happens to be Daniel's ex-wife, because like I said, this is a small town. There's another nurse there named Beverly. There's a trainee named Kim, an older doctor named Dr. Powell. There's a patient in there, in one of the rooms named Cliff. And then in the waiting room, there's this pregnant girl named Maggie and her grandfather, Ben, who is come with her to help her out or whatever. So almost immediately after Daniel, the cop, brings James into the hospital to have him looked at, things start getting a little bit weird at this fucking hospital. Beverly actually goes into some weird kind of trance, it appears, and ends up killing Cliff with a scalpel, sticking in his eyeball and stuff like that. And then, she cuts the skin off her own face, and then, kind of lunges at Daniel, and he ends up having to shoot her because she looks like she's going to stab him. So, not long after that, this state trooper arrives, whose name is Mitchell, who's played by Art Hindle, actually, who's in, a fuck ton of stuff. So he was actually looking for James, the guy that the cop brought in, because he's investigating what he calls a bloodbath, like out at the house we saw at the beginning, obviously, where they set the woman on fire and everything. But then suddenly, like, none of the phones in the place seem to be able to reach the outside world. Daniel goes outside to try the radio in his police cruiser, but that doesn't work either. And while he's out there, he's set upon by this creepy looking person who's wearing this kind of white full body burqa type situation, like a, just this full body like costume with like a black triangle like over the face. Now, so before he can even like figure out like who the fuck this is or what the hell is going on, the hospital becomes like surrounded by all of these creepy people like in these outfits, and they seem to have been summoned by this kind of weird horn-like noise that's coming from the sky. Now, Daniel is actually wounded, so he goes back in there and they're all freaking out. But meanwhile, back in the hospital, the group have discovered that the one-time nurse, Beverly, the one who tore her face off and everything, there's really no delicate way to say this. She's turned into like essentially like a big tentacled monster, okay? So they're just kind of like, well, you don't see that every day. Now, the two shooters from the first scene, the ones that set the woman on fire, their names are Vincent and his son Simon. They come to the hospital in order to finish the job they started, which was to kill James. That's who they were chasing. Now, they do seem to know about this whole situation vis-a-vis like people transforming into monsters, but they don't seem to know much else. But at this point, it seems they're not really taking any chances because they're like, look, we've seen a couple of people like turn into that. We don't know any of you fuckers, so we're just gonna like kill you all and let God sort it out, And then after this, like the movie almost takes on the feel of like a siege type flick, like, like The Mist or Assault on Precinct 13 or something like vaguely, you know what I mean? Because all of the characters are trapped inside the hospital by like these white-robed cult people outside, and they're also really uneasy about the people that they're locked in the building with, because these are essentially like, a bunch of strangers, basically, because any of them could turn into these Lovecraftian tentacled murder critters like at any moment, apparently. Also, throughout the movie, Daniel has been having visions of this like vast featureless void, title drop, in which this like massive black pyramid just kind of looms on the horizon. It's really cool looking, like the visuals. So as the story goes on, we actually figure out that this is indeed another dimension. And much like in Hellraiser, the Clive Barker movie, somebody has figured out how to access this other dimension in order to further his own goals, let's call it that. So the culprit, the person that did that, is, spoiler alert, Dr. Powell, like the elderly, nefarious motherfucker in the hospital. It turns out, they discover, that he had been experimenting with opening the door to this void for some time because he believed that it would... Well, he wanted to become immortal, for one thing, because don't they all? But he also thought that it would bring his daughter, Sarah, back from the dead. Now, later in the movie, like the characters, while they're kind of like looking around in the hospital and stuff, they stumble across this weird sub-basement that's like not supposed to be there. And it has all of these just malformed human horrors in it. Like one of the characters even just says, "This is hell," or something, like just because there's all these like monstrous people. And these, you find out, are Dr. Powell's failed experiments that I guess he's keeping around for shits and giggles. I'm not really sure. So the fire that ravaged the hospital, the reason that there was only a skeleton staff to start with was also Dr. Powell's doing, you find out, because he was lurking around down there, tampering in God's domain and stuff like that. And I guess like a fire got started and shit happened, You also find out that the pregnant girl, the teenager in the waiting room, Maggie, was actually impregnated by Dr. Powell himself. And that her baby is going to be the conduit for the return of Sarah. Although I will note that he didn't tell her that that's exactly what was going to happen. You know what I mean? So she's a little bit surprised when she finds out how that shit's going to go down. Daniel's ex-wife, Allison, also gets transformed into this baby maker thing, like for the hell dimension. You know what I mean? Like there's all these fucking tentacles and stuff. And he actually ends up having to like kill her, like to put her out of her misery, you know what I mean? And this is like really sad because the reason that they divorced was because she had a miscarriage and like they couldn't deal with it and stuff like that. So that kind of makes the whole thing like a lot more poignant, you know? So at the end of the movie, like after pretty much everybody dies, Dr. Powell, who now is skinless, looking like fucking Frank from Hellraiser, he tells Daniel that he can have Allison and his dead kid back if he accepts death. And you're not entirely sure what he means by this. He says okay, but then he like tackles, you know, Mr. Skinless, no flesh dude, and they both fall into the void. So at the end, like Daniel and Allison are shown standing alone in the void from his earlier visions, and there's like nobody else around. It's just like this vast like emptiness with like little mountains and like this big triangle and stuff like that. So I'm gonna say, like, as independent horror films go, this was pretty fucking ambitious, I gotta say. And I admit that I was extremely impressed with it, especially after my second viewing. Like, I really liked it a lot the first time I saw it a couple years ago, but like watching it again today, I got like a lot more appreciation for it. It kind of plays like something of a mashup between maybe Hellraiser, The Mist, The Thing, Prince of Darkness, The Beyond, the Lucio Fulci movie, especially like the end kind of reminded me of that. And obviously there's like a huge heaping helping of H.P. Lovecraft in there, like for good measure. The first time I watched it, I think I found the plot a little bit hard to follow, but I think it was like kind of clearer the second time. Now, the exact nature of the cult like surrounding the void and the exact end game of what Dr. Powell was up to were kind of left a little bit ambiguous. But even though I kind of feel like the movie made up for this kind of unwillingness to like completely explain itself by just being really, I mean, exceptionally entertaining. It's really fast paced. Like I said, it just kind of hits the ground running and really doesn't stop. And it had like just amazing like gore effects. You know, the creature designs and shit like that, and the grue and everything like that was just, it looked amazing, and all of it was practical. The acting in it is also fantastic, which is really good because you kind of get a little bit of an emotional attachment, at least to some of the characters, especially like the main character. Now, you know, even though it's obviously like an amalgam of a bunch of different 80s horror flicks, like the ones that I just brought up and maybe a couple of other ones, but it never really feels like a retread though, because it really has its own original vibe going on. So yeah, if you haven't seen it, I really highly recommend this movie, especially if you're a fan of like 80s cosmic horror, like, you know, if, like John Carpenter movies or Stuart Gordon or somebody like that. And I think this is easily one of the best Lovecraftian films ever made. So that will do it for this Flickers of Fear. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, comment, and all of that other good stuff. And I will see you again on the next one. Bye.